We can definitely get started. Um, Hope everyone had a great weekend. All right, so tonight, we will be talking, and then thank you very much for the flexibility with the meeting online. ICAM is on, so this will be streaming live on TV right now, as well as obviously posting thereafter. So tonight we're going to just talk about, I'll go through the agenda and then hand it over to Josh, who's going to be driving the presentation, but we're going to discuss the current draft zoning, the design guidelines, including, which I know I reached out to you about any ideas, which actually makes it's easier to do this online, I think, so we can pull up some of these parcels, visuals of some of these parcels, but any really good hallmark buildings that we would like to incorporate characteristics of into the design guidelines as we think about this over the next couple of weeks. And then sort of shift gears to talking about the outreach and engagement, followed by next steps, comment, etc. So with that, Josh, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Good evening, everyone. And thank you again to the flexibility of you all to change the meeting format. It's very helpful. So as Andrea discussed, we're focusing tonight to start on the current draft zoning. And I don't want to bury the headline, which is that we as a group are in very good shape. We have a zoning package which is complete in sort of all the ways that it needs to be complete. A package has been submitted now to EOHLC for pre-adoption review. And at this point, if we needed to put that zoning, for example, forward to the town meeting warrant article, it is ready to do so. But so it's really up to us now just to see where we are at now and then improve upon where we're at. But we have a very solid foundation for what needs to be done. So just feel comfortable with that milestone has been achieved. And, congratulations to you all for helping us to get there. So that's a really big achievement. And I don't want that headline to get lost in the details that we're discussing tonight, but that's a great job for you all. So let's, again, for anyone who has maybe just tuning in or watching a recording, this is the Ipswich 3A Task Force, which is a group of really dedicated residents representing a variety of perspectives in the town and who have been ushering this process for probably around 18 months or so now to get this zoning to where it is today. So appreciate all of your efforts. The group's charge is to recommend a zoning district which works best for the town of Ipswich and is in compliance with the state's 3A requirements. Ultimately, the town will decide whether or not to adopt these zoning recommendations at town meeting, which will occur on October 22nd. We are being supported by the planning department and also have a team here at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council where John Cruz and myself, Josh Fiala, work and support this project. So we are trucking along on our overall process and we are squarely into that final phase of thinking about the zoning, which we have and will continue tonight, and then also starting to turn toward thinking about support for adoption. So those are the main focuses for this evening. A little more detail in terms of what's still in front of us. We have passed the pre-compliance package, our pre-adoption package along to our colleagues internally at MAPC who are doing the financial modeling for the affordability levels and requirements. So they have that underway. The package has been submitted as of, let me just check a calendar date, that was submitted on July 19th, I believe, Friday, July 19th. And so that would, if EOHLC takes the full 90 days, which we have heard that they do, that would put us with results, I think, the Thursday before town meeting. And I don't know, let me just see if I can grab the exact date on that. That is October 24th. No, sorry, October 17th, which would precede October 22nd. So we would have the benefit of receiving their review letter and and then the confidence, hopefully, that would give us that this package is compliant and fulfills all of their requirements. If there were an issue that they've highlighted, then that issue will likely need to be resolved on town meeting floor, but we would have that knowledge in advance and be able to square away a game plan to do so. But hopefully that's not the case. All right. The few other bars on this schedule that are underway, in addition to the zoning recommendations, as we're talking about this evening, Andrea highlighted, we are talking about design recommendations, which will be companion to the zoning and supplement the zoning requirements as well, which we've been talking about. So we'll kind of shift gear. We'll be helping, based on our conversation tonight, refining the zoning to get it just to the right place based upon the task force's feedback, but then also shifting to really focus on those design guidelines and getting those prepared as well. So let's discuss the current draft zoning. We will walk through piece by piece, and then also we've received some comments from task force members, but also, invite comments this evening as well. So don't feel like you have had to. I have the comments we've already received in this presentation, but don't feel like if you have a new comment in this moment that you are also welcome to do so. So we want to have a discussion piece by piece. This is an overall summary of the approach, which is laid out in the details of the zoning language. So we have one overlay district, which is broken into 4 sub-districts. We have named those sub-districts MOD, which is multifamily overlay district. And those MODs are just numbered 1 through 4. And as we've discussed previously, roughly correspond to the underlying zoning, which they overlay, which includes the central business district, the general business district, the in-town residential over at Colonial Drive. And then there is, as we have discussed, a mandatory mixed use district, which is MOD 4. And we've discussed this a lot, but don't need to belabor it, but it is included in the package. It's not technically a 3A district, but it contributes to the compliance for our whole package. The draft overlay, the language that we have in the zoning today is primarily based upon the EOHLC model. Some of the comments do highlight that there's some cross-checking and cross-referencing with the existing zoning bylaw in Ipswich, which needs to occur, and we agree with that. But I think it's a good place to start with their model, and then kind of adjust from there. We have made some adjustments, but I think the comments point to a few more adjustments that should be made. The whole zoning package requires site plan review and approval and will be supplemented by design guidelines, which we're talking about this evening as well. So here is a much more sort of hard-lined and I think near finalized map of the overlay districts and those sub-districts. So you can see each one defined here with the color coding, and then you can see the related acreage and unit count for each of those sub-districts as well, and that's how they are contributing to compliance. And again, those are hypothetical figures that I would say are not likely to be reached in the short term. They may be accumulated over the long term, but this is not like a flip of a switch to achieve the units which are shown here. This is a very hypothetical zoning calculation. So,
Josh, could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Peter. I think in the future, when you're doing these decks, it would be great and very helpful if you actually colored or somehow delineated, like, so for example, the 257 units goes to the land area to the left, or the 462 refers to different ones, because especially it's pretty obvious for the 462 and 257, but for the other two, it doesn't really call that out. So it would make it helpful for people to understand.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Just to match the same color in terms of instead of having this uniform blue. I like that.
Thank you.
We can do that for sure. So I'll maybe, in the absence of that in this presentation, I'll just describe verbally those connections. So in the upper left corner are the totals, which is 933 units Glenn, did you have something?
No.
No. All right. And then 53.9 acres in total. And those are, as you'll see later, those are very close to the requirements of Ipswich. So we're really, I think in this version, we've come very close to the requirements, which is something that we've heard in the feedback is like, don't overshoot this. We want to just sort of hit the requirements. So this is, I think, promising from a hopefully growing support for adoption perspective. If we move in towards the districts, MOD1 is the darkest blue that overlaps with the central business district. And you can see that's 11.5 acres in total, the dark blue there, and it would potentially produce 214 units. MOD2 overlaps with the general business district primarily, and that is 25.3 acres and potentially produces 462 units. Then MOD3, which is the Colonial Drive in Town Residence District, is 17.1 acres, producing 257 units potentially. And then lastly is MOD4, which is the Mandatory Mixed Use District, producing 133 units. And its acreage does not count toward compliance, so there is no acreage listed. There's just a little tighter zoom on those districts in the station area, centrally located in the town center, focusing on Central Street and Market Street and Topsfield Road. And then as you shift down Topsfield Road to Colonial Drive, you see that last district as well. And just because it's, I think, sometimes difficult to imagine the context of these places on those simple parcel diagrams, we wanted to bring forward these roughly, I mean, these are, you should definitely think about the exact boundaries based upon the previous diagrams, but this is roughly the boundaries which are shown on those previous diagrams with a three-dimensional aerial, a bird's eye view of the district. So this is the Mandatory Mixed Use District, the MOD1, which is the Central Business District overlay, and then that comes down as well around the EBSCO property. MOD2 and its northern extents, which overlays the General Business District, and then comes down as it moves south, and then ends along Topsfield Road. And then MOD3, which is the Colonial Drive area. And then you can see how these overlay with the existing zoning, which is what I've been referring to as well. So there are some parcels, for example, along Topsfield Road in MOD2, which are in-town residence zoning today on the north side of Topsfield Road in that case. Those are included in our boundary, but for the most part, it's General Business District, Central Business District, and then the in-town residence at Colonial Drive. So that's the primary underline. And again, I know the task force knows this, but just to reinforce for anyone catching this online, the overlay zoning which we're proposing does not modify or impact the underlying zoning in any way. So the rights which previously were available through the zoning in Ipswich are still existing. They are not modified in any way. These overlays provide a new opportunity on the same properties that is focused on multifamily housing. So we had a few comments, and welcome any others in this setting from the task force about the zoning map specifically. One comment was about moving 21 and 25 Hammett Street from the GB to CB. So that would be from MOD2 to MOD3. I mean, MOD1, I think is how I would interpret that comment. And then I'll just go through all these and we can talk about them. Not coloring the streets on the zoning map. I think that is probably something that we don't want to do because the acreage does include the streets. So I think that just coloring the parcels would be a little misleading. I think This kind of depiction is probably the most accurate, which is just a boundary. We don't need to shade it necessarily, but that's maybe a detail we can talk about. I think that was maybe Chris, your comment. Maybe if you want to expand on that, you're welcome to. And then the last comment was, why not just add 48 and 50 Market Street to MOD2 and not call them out individually? And that was in their relationship to the mandatory mixed use district, I believe. So we can, those are each of the comments here. We have received comments from the task force prior to the pre-adoption submittal, just to say, some of which we have integrated, those which seemed very obvious or non-controversial. The ones that we've kept for this discussion are ones that we wanted to hear a task force conversation about. So we'll start with these, and then we have, again, going through each zoning section, we have a similar setup. So any thoughts on these initial comments, and then we can go into any new comments.
So this is Chris, I'll just comment on the first two that I had suggested. I think when you look at Hammond Street, there are only a couple lots along Hammond Street that are in CGB and not CB. So which didn't make sense in terms of the consistency of the streetscape that might evolve as a result. That it seemed out of character with the rest of that street. And that's really a zoning designation question. And the only reason I suggested taking the street out was so that you could actually see the parcels in those colors. But what you said makes sense in terms of the acreage and seeing the districts as a whole.
So can we go back, Chris, to your first suggestion? So you suggest, which ones are 21 and 25?
Well, I think there were 3 or 4. Can you zoom into that corner?
Are those along the southern edge of Hammett there, here, where my cursor?
The west side of Hammett.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So they're the only properties along Hammett that are not in the CB. I think you and I talked about this, Glenn.
Does this include the Ithaki's property?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
yes. Yes, I would agree that at the very least they ought to be in the MOD, in the what do they call it? The mandatory mixed use district. They would make sense.
Well, not at the moment. I don't believe anything on Hammett Street is in the right.
No, but I think it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's correct. Nothing on Hammett presently is in the mandatory mixed use district. It really focuses on Central and Market.
Right.
Right. And I think, as Chris and I had discussed, it's desirable, we think, that there ought to be mixed use on Hammett Street as well. And to the extent that we can influence how some of that, Chris is aware of some redevelopment that, is that secret?
Sort of.
Okay. So there are some opportunities that we think would present themselves that would be beneficial to the town if we included some properties in Hammett Street in the mandatory mixed use district. Is that fair to say, Chris?
Yes. Yep. So,
I take it incentivizing mixed use is not good enough. I guess I'm curious about why we want to make it mandatory.
Well, Ken, thank you for that. Because what I was going to say is when Glenn and I talked, we did an exercise on one of the parcels using the footnote 11 with the special permit. We were actually able to get more units on the site than if we looked at 3A.
And
Right.
So the idea was that if we didn't do something relative to the mandatory, then we might end up with something else that was maybe less appealing, right?
Right. So it'd just be all residential as opposed to having some mixed use, which the footnote 11 would require as part of that special permit. But it was in any case, it was a really interesting exercise to look at one particular parcel and look at it through the lens of footnote 11 with a special permit versus 3A versus what would be allowed without either. And the greatest density that we could achieve was actually with footnote 11 on a special permit. Which in a way kind of supports the 3A, right? The 3A is not so onerous that it's creating more than what would already be allowed.
And
Yeah.
I think there was also some curiosity on the parcel at 2 Washington Street that is a subject now of a special permit application that'll be coming in soon for I think 50 some odd units, which may actually exceed what is possible under the 3A zoning. So that's another one that we wanted to do some analysis of to try to figure out how we should approach that property as it relates to the 3A zoning.
Yep.
I guess
So,
I'm curious
we're
about
not
the
gonna figure out-
thought of
figure out all
requiring again, the business part of it there. I mean, there's already buildings on Hammett Street that are 100% residential, right? I mean,
Correct.
it's not like the central business district where it's mostly mixed use already. There are several solely residential properties on Hammett Street. So why require it now?
Doesn't have to be all of Hammett Street, but there are other places like the vacant lot to the north of or south of the entrance to the parking lot that's owned by the Brookline Bank that has been, as Chris knows, has been discussion for many years to do a mixed use building there. And so we don't want to do anything that might discourage that from happening through unintentionally through the zoning. So we think that it would make sense, particularly for lots that we have long envisioned as being appropriate for mixed use zoning, to take a close look at it, not to exclude it from the opportunity to address with the 3A.
So the other thing too, I would say to that is just because there's an existing building that's all residential doesn't mean in the future, it doesn't, well, first of all, it doesn't mean they have to change to mixed use.
Correct.
At all. And it just means that in the future as a pattern, we would prefer to see mixed use along Hammett Street in the long run.
Correct.
So relative to the comment about so-called 50 to 54, I think were the addresses that are the subject of special permit multifamily housing over the last 6 or 7 years. Those addresses are 48, 50, 52, 54, and 56 Hammett Street. So I think you got it lot-wise correct, but those are the actual addresses.
Okay.
Josh, I guess from a compliance perspective, I know the whole thing about doing mandatory mixed use seemed to have an effect on the numbers. If we make this change, is it significant?
It is potentially. I think that it's certainly easier to shift those Hammett Street properties to subdistrict MOD1 from MOD2. We can explore moving more of Hammett Street into the MOD4, which is the mandatory mixed use subdistrict. There will be likely an upper limit, which we will meet. Right now, our compliance numbers are interesting because without the mandatory mixed use, are below compliance. So it's really the mandatory mixed use numbers that push us over the top. But as you recall, they are capped at 25%. We are right now underneath that cap. As we move more parcels into the MMU, we might hit that cap, in which case it might create a number of units issue because we would, have less. We will at some point the math will hit where we have less than is required because of that cap. But we could play with that and see. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay.
When if we were to shift those units, some of those parcels we're talking about right now into the mandatory mixed use, And since that acreage doesn't count, does that mean we're making some of these other MODs larger from an acreage perspective to compensate, or not necessarily? You know what I mean? Is that
Potentially.
Yeah, that's the other consideration is the acreage. I think we have a little bit of play on the acreage, but that would be the other sort of trigger point that we would not want to fall out of compliance because of.
Right, and we're there. Chris and I and all of us realizes this is complicated, so we're not trying to try to figure this out tonight. But we just want to introduce that and say that those are issues that we need to consider, as we go through the process of finalizing this. And as we've talked in the past, we're going to present this. The select board's going to, or the planning board's going to discuss this on Thursday night, and they're going to send it to the select board on Friday, and then it's going to be referred back to the planning board for hearing on the following Tuesday. I think the way where we are now is that we need to say this is in broad brush where we're at, with the understanding that there's going to be a fair amount of evolution, not in concept so much, but in language, how we deal with, for example, some of the site plan review stuff, which been pointed out that it might be easier just simply to refer to the existing site plan review language in the bylaw rather than to try to replicate all that within the bylaw. And there's some other things like that. Those kind of things can be adjusted. And then we've still got the whole affordability issue to work our way through. So those are things that that's not uncommon, as I think Stephen's here, would tell you with zoning provisions, particularly as things as significant as this, that there can be and often is a lot of evolution as long as you stay within the general concept of what you're introducing or initiating, which we were doing next week. Then it's not problematic, but it is going to involve a lot of. And I think it's important that we're aware of that, and we let folks know that this is the way things are going to be playing out between now and really before the warrant's signed, but certainly between now and when public hearing is held, which is on the 22nd, Tony? Yeah. Can't hear you. You're muted, Tony. But still can't hear you. Now we can hear you.
Yeah. So
Am I the only one who can't hear Tony?
No.
Tony,
No, she's breaking up.
you're breaking up. We can't hear you.
yeah, it's hard to hear. Is any better?
No.
Oh. Okay. I can figure that. I'm thinking, yeah,
What did you say?
Tony, you could call in on your cell phone too, so we can see you, and then you can, sometimes that works better with the audio. But yes, the planning board public hearing would be August 22nd.
Yeah,
with
okay.
continuance to the 29th for a special meeting to incorporate any changes.
Right, got it. Okay.
Okay, so from these initial comments, what we're hearing is we will explore at least moving those parcels from MOD 2 to MOD 1, those parcels along Hammett Street is what I'm referring to, and also explore if some portion of Hammett Street could be made into mandatory mixed use without bringing us out of compliance, basically.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So get that noted, and we will go to the next. So in this process, both reviewing the zoning as it currently stands, but then also those comments from the task force, and we'll continue this discussion. So these are the zoning characteristics that we've seen many times in the past, but again, now laid out by the sub-districts as they're defined in the zoning. And these zoning characteristics are based on the current zoning of the town, and only where the changes have occurred, you see the strike-throughs, and those changes are from the current zoning to what is proposed. So the zoning is in large part very consistent with the current zoning of the town. Minimum lot size being one of the changes among each of these sub-districts, and the minimum parking spaces per unit being the other change. And then finally, the last change that we introduced, a maximum unit per acre, which replaces the minimum lot size, which has been reduced at the top line. And there's some of the examples we've been showing of similar units per acre, but in some of those cases, actually even a higher unit per acre than is allowed, but still consistent with the character of the town. And so some of the compliance figures, the details that we've been talking about in that last conversation on the districts and the boundaries along Hammett Street, you can see here what I was mentioning. So modeled MOD1, MOD2, and MOD3, which are the 3A sub-districts, combined to 933 units. With MOD4, which is the mandatory mixed-use district, it adds to a total of 1,066, which is over the 971 required. The station area is where most of those units are located, 804 within the station area. We have right now 133 units for mandatory mixed use, and again, that's capped at 243. So we do have a little bit of room there to increase that number. And then the gross land area is just over the 50 acres, excuse me, 53.9. Most of that again is in the transit area. The contiguity is coming from the connectedness of sub-districts MOD1 and MOD2. So that is in compliance. And then our total dwelling units per acre is in excess by half a unit per acre over the 15, which is required. So we have at least as per our modeling, which again, in its final compliance determination, the UHLC will do its own modeling, but according to our modeling, which is using the AUHLC template in terms of the spreadsheet that we're using, it is a compliant zoning solution. So this is all good news, and it's all very close to what is required. But again, you see some wiggle room in case their compliance modeling is just a little bit different than ours. So I think this is almost as good as it gets in terms of the numbers we need and not overshooting them.
So, excuse me, Josh, this is great and really helpful. I'm wondering if there's a column that shows what would be allowed with footnote 11 in a special permit, because that's, as we're finding, may actually be a higher density than what's modeled for the 3A. Glenn, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, about what part? I mean, I agree the second part. You asked me whether I think it would be helpful to do it.
Well, to demonstrate that if currently without 3A, a developer or property owner could actually do more than the 8.1 units an acre with existing zoning if they use footnote 11 with a special permit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be useful to demonstrate, because it certainly supports the argument that we've been making all along, that that when you look at, you compare the 3A to what Ipswich already requires or allows in these areas, the differences are fairly de minimis.
But didn't we already did that when we did that initial delta between what could be built now versus what could be built under 3A? Did that include footnote 11?
Yeah, but he didn't do it. We didn't do it by parcel by parcel. That's what you're talking about, right, Chris?
Well, no, I think to Sarah's point, I don't think we ever compared it to if someone used footnote 11 with a special permit, what that density would be. I'm not sure we actually saw that.
What did we see? I guess that's
basically the underlying zoning without footnote 11 is what we're looking at.
Okay.
Yeah, so the column on the right, which is existing zoning, is not the maximum not the maximum that could be achieved under the existing zoning through that special permit. It is, I would say, in some ways an abstraction of the existing zoning, because the existing zoning is a little complicated in terms of its stepped nature, in terms of how its minimum lot size increases with the number of units. So that type of, the intricacy of the current zoning is not reflected in these numbers. Just, I guess that's the more exacting footnote.
But to be clear, it's not like if you were a developer today and you wanted to use footnote 11 and you were going to go through the special permit, that there was a guarantee that you would get maximum build out.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
So perhaps then the number that we're looking at that we call the, modicum of that would be perhaps more reflective of what could actually feasibly be built. I guess I want to show a delta because I think it's really important for folks who might be supportive of this otherwise, but I guess I want to be cautious and show something that's an authentic number too. You know what I mean?
That's a good point.
Sorry, I think, Steven, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, do you mind?
No, go for it.
So, because I was looking at this table as well, and I think, I don't know what the minimum tells us versus the modeled, since we're sort of going to go forward with the modeled, I would think. So if you had the first column be existing zoning, existing zoning, no special permit, and then a column that said existing zoning, footnote 11, special permit, and then the modeled. I don't think the compliance result checkbox does us anything. We wouldn't be presenting it if we weren't going to be presenting a compliant model. But I think from left to right, it should be like, here's base, here's what could be done, and then here's the, and then here's 3A to really show that, because it is a truism that with a special permit and certain permissions, you could get close or higher than 3A, I think. And I think the point we're trying to build to is a conversation about why haven't those units been built yet? Is a special permit really the barrier to having those units built? Like, if existing conditions could allow for it, why hasn't it happened? And I think that's it's sort of a sincere question. Like, what is it about development here? And if we identify the reasons why it has or has not, those units have or have not been built because they haven't been built, then does 3A change any of that? What parts of that does 3A change? All right, I'll mute myself now. Sorry.
No, I agree with Chris. If I might,
go ahead.
Sorry, just to add to, I think I agree with what you're saying, Stephen. I think my problem is, and I think maybe what Sarah's alluding to is, you can't just make a column that has like every parcel done with a special permit, because that would be crazy, right? Like, not every parcel would be done that way. So,
well, it could. So, but I think to Stephen's point, I think you're right, exactly right about the columns in the order. And I think what it demonstrates, to your point, is that, okay, so if there was a special permit for all these, we would have this increased density, which would actually be more than what 3A allows. And what 3A is doing is it's mitigating between the maximum that could be done with a special permit and the underlying code to hopefully promote more housing. So that 3A, all of a sudden, the perception of 3A is that it's sort of a moderate addition to our zoning that actually helps promote more housing.
So then you do that for every single lot parcel?
Why not?
I guess that makes sense, because the 3A is modeled to do it to every single parcel too.
Exactly. So is the existing zoning. Doesn't mean that people are going to build to that anyway.
Fair enough. You're on mute, Sarah.
Just when
It was actually fun watching you talk without.
You're still on mute, though.
There you go.
Okay, I'm back.
All right.
So I guess the next question then is also, like, I liked Stephen's transition, showing the transitions, and then I think when that begs the question about by right, right? That whole by right conversation, because I think people don't really understand that whole by right piece.
Right.
The difference, what that really, if you've never really gone through the, that special permit process, or been involved in that at all, you don't really know that's a big deal. It's complicated, it's complex. And that by right piece, even with site plan review, that's a big shift.
So
It's an opportunity, I guess.
What I like about that though is that the existing zoning, which has a slightly lower density that you don't need a special permit for, to do the special permit, you get much more. But we're saying, okay, if you do it by right, we're giving you a little bit less, but more than the underlying zoning.
Right. And I like the idea when Josh talks about it as it's an opportunity. You can continue to go back to underlying zoning. This is another option for property owners.
Yep.
Fabulous. And also,
I agree with all this. We can make those adjustments and come up with a way to model. I'm still not going to promise that a modeled version of the special permit requirements is going to be the perfect reflection of what that upper end is, but we can come up with some way to, again, I think that what's key to this conversation is that the current zoning should be expressed as a range, and that there's a lower end of that range and a higher end of that range. And the 3A zoning falls within that range, which I think is true and would be a key point.
Exactly. But I think to Pete's point, right, the 3A that's modeled is the maximum. It's probably not what's actually going to get built, but it's the maximum that would be allowed to that zoning. Same thing with footnote 11. It's not saying that that'll be built. It's saying that that's what the maximum would be.
right.
Well, Josh, I don't know if you want to use specific examples, probably not, but I would say, and Tony, you can jump in if we can hear you. I think that all of the footnote 11 special permits that came before the planning board in the time that I was on it, none of them got built out at the density that they originally came in for. And whether it was, size of the buildings, the size of the units, which everybody wanted some pretty big units, or, it was either that or it was the total number of units. And some of it was the vagaries of the zoning, because 83 High Street goes up on the hill and they wanted to put on the flatlands everything they could build up theoretically on the hillside. So there are a lot of issues, but I think that if you used a couple of examples, it might help, but it might also be politically challenging.
Just to add to that, Carolyn's right, but there are other instances going further back where there were projects that were approved at the max, such as town hall conversion at the 11 units. That was at the max, and there have been others that have too. So both points are true. There have been instances where there may be more instances where it did not get to the max, but there are certainly more than one instance where they were allowed to go to the max. So it's a case by case.
I think this gets into how we're going to sell, help try to have other people understand this whole thing anyways.
Exactly.
And it goes to some of, to your point, and you've shown, if you actually, Josh, could you go back to that slide? I think it was back a couple where it shows some of the pictures of buildings. Yeah, actually the next one, that one right there. It might be good to show people, and I'm not saying you need to do this, Josh, but when we're all talking about this, and it helps me understand it as well, to show this is what exists now, which is 24 units, and this is what is possible that it's actually less than that under 3A. So, and sometimes it'll be more than what the current building is, but it would be good for us to have a couple different examples, partially because that's going to show how a lot of things really aren't going to change.
Yes,
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
I don't know how many lots we need to do that to, but it would be good for us to get that information. Maybe that's something that Josh's team doesn't do. We have to figure that out.
And I agree. I mean, we constantly, I think, get a little trapped on the numbers here too ourselves, but I think that the larger points that the numbers are making are really the stronger narrative, in that the exacting numbers can be both confusing and, I mean, ultimately, the thing that we also have to say about any number is that these are all abstractions. Even the calculations for 3A, that number of units is not going to be built. So it's These are all, I think that the narrative that comes from these numbers is more important than the numbers themselves.
And that can be said of all zoning. I mean, that the entire zoning bylaw, it's all abstractions.
Correct. I think that the basics of the numbers is that they check out in terms of this being a compliant solution, and that's the real take-home message. And then we can talk about, I think the other take-home messages are how this fits within the context of the current zoning and how important a narrative that is. So moving us along, there are other components to the zoning which you've all seen. This is the outline of that language in the sections that we have in the zoning, which would be inserted into the town's bylaw. I'll go section by section with those now with some of the comments that we've heard and not read through it all, but just the format here as this series of slides progresses is above the top line is either a summary or the exact language, if it was short enough, from the bylaw as it currently stands, the draft language. And then below are some of the comments that are outstanding that we have received already from task force members, and then invite again your additional comments this evening. So on the purpose statement, it starts with a purpose statement, what this is all about. Most zoning sections have that purpose statement. This one is focused on housing and the housing typologies that this would expand in the town, the increasing of affordable housing units, and providing a residential base to support commercial uses in the Ipswich town center. All of those purposes are consistent with Ipswich's past planning, which is also very important to note. The CBD plan, the community development plan, the housing production plan, all of which are pointing in the direction which 3A has manifested. So the comments that we heard on this purpose statement is that there should be a stronger connection to the community development plan and bring some of that language forward, perhaps quote from the plan directly, being careful not to add on purposes that were not in the original 3A requirements to, I think that maybe that was about an issue, maybe thinking about how that might be compliant with UHLC or step outside of their guidance. And then also thinking about the final comment is that since no multifamily is allowed by right elsewhere, does it give us more range where we're allowing it by right to require unique issues? So that's increasing the amount of affordable housing from what the current requirements are in the town, and then also exceeding other state requirements. So I think some of these, if you made these comments, you're welcome to expand or explain. And if you have additional thoughts about the purpose statement that you want to add to, we'd be happy to hear them.
Yeah, the last two comments are mine, and the third one, I have to say, I wasn't totally lucid. But I think the question to you, Josh, is you know, we've been told we can't exceed anything in this district that doesn't already exist elsewhere in town, and that's what I'm wondering. And I did try to go back and look at the zoning relative to all of these things, but I don't know what we say and purposes elsewhere and whether this is acceptable. I guess I'm just asking you to, you know, to relook at that and make sure we haven't strayed too far. I don't think any of us disagree with those purposes. It's just trying to keep this as clean as possible.
Yeah, that's a good question. So a purpose statement is included in EOHLC's model bylaw, which is the outline that we're building on. So I think that it would not be frowned upon by EOHLC, and I think that the purposes that are expressed are very consistent with their desired goals. So I feel pretty good about the purpose statement relative to their review. I think it's just a matter of if there wants to be more language relating it back to the town's own plans, I think that is a reasonable desire, and we can build on that if that is shared by the task force members.
My take is that I like the purpose statement as it is. I think the three things that are identified are sufficient to my mind. So I don't expand on it. The only comment, or the other comment that I have about this section is, and this goes back to a point I've been making, you know, throughout, is that I'm a little uncomfortable with this references to by right, because to me, it's inconsistent with the notion that we're also requiring site plan review. And I know we threw in some language in the definition, and what I had initially thought of as a way to phrase it, to say something like this zoning provides for, instead of saying as of right multifamily housing, provides for multifamily housing without the need for a special permit. So, but so it doesn't then imply that there's no other review process. And again, you can get there by later on through some of these definitions, but I'd rather, hit it right up front and say we're not using that word as of right because it's a misnomer. But we are making the point it's without a special permit, so it will satisfy the state because that's what it's all about in their minds, no special permit requirement.
Yeah, I agree because by right sort of sounds like you're seizing something or taking it over rather than following the process that's outlined here.
So I agree with all that. My only question is, does the 3A and the EOHCD require that we say by right? That would be the only reason I would include it. Otherwise, I agree with Glenn and Mariana.
Can't imagine, Josh, I can't imagine that if we change the language to say without the need for a special permit, they're going to quibble about our not using it as of right.
Site plan review is allowed. I think that we can either state it in the positive or the negative. I think either one would be fine, to either state as of right with site plan review or without the need for special permit. They, I think, have the same enough meaning that either would be fine.
So
I like that language.
So my comment, the first comment was mine, and it's reinforcing this notion of optics, right? So if we reinforce the fact that the community development plan has already stated these things, the 3A is not so onerous that it's not consistent with what we've already been saying. And again, it's reinforcing that 3A is really not much different what we're already doing.
I guess
Did you have any wording in mind, Chris? Because to Josh's point, it's already there at some level. Is there additional language you're thinking of?
No. I'm just making a point that's why we should leave that in there, that refers to the community development. And any reference we can make to it anywhere in the zoning, I think would just help us reinforce that. And
Right.
part of that too will be when we present it, right? And how we sell it.
Well,
I do.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
I do really, because we've talked about the phrase by right, as of right, my gut tells me we should be really totally clear. And I prefer the phrase, by right or as of right with site plan review. So we're being totally upfront that, when we use the phrase site plan review, we're showing people where the guardrails are that we're going to put in. But we're being really upfront about the phrase, as of right. I think if we use other words, the optic is we're dancing a little bit, and I want to be. I guess my gut tells me we should. I feel like zoning for a lot of folks is complex and complicated, and I like the way this purpose statement is really clear, and it really lays out and illustrates the goals. I really think we should use as clear language when we get to that site plan review piece as we can, as inclusive language, so people really know what we're saying. It is as of right, but we're including a site plan review on purpose.
So I agree with your justification, but not your conclusion. I think that to me, the by right is more problematic, and I certainly know that at least I have, but I think others have emphasized that this isn't a by right process fully because it has a special permit. I mean, a site plan review component. But I don't know that we should get hung up on it, and I'm not going to fight to the mat on that. But that's something we can continue to sort through.
Yeah. Yeah, Glenn, I think I'm sort of in between the two of you on this, in that I think a slide, when I talk about 3A, I describe it, multifamily. I use the air quotes for by right, because by right it's not it really is. It's somewhat counterintuitive what by right means in most communities, including ours. Going back to that point of why haven't these units been built? That there was a pathway for this number of units to be built. Why haven't they been built? Some of that is in the by right versus special permit versus site plan review, all these things. And so I think a slide explaining what each of those things means in this context up front would help. And I'll defer to all of you, because I don't want to. I haven't been to one of your meetings in quite a long time, so I don't want to try and steer the ship here. But my experience has been master plans or community development plans. I think it's important to establish that this type of goal is set there, but I think we're really talking about something that is separate and apart from the CDP here with 3A.
Yeah, just briefly to add to that, part of your question, why hasn't that been built? That's just sort of the nature of zoning, in that you lay out what's possible, but you're not expecting that those maximums are going to be reached. And so I think it's really more a function of that than might there be some element to with developers on the special permit process? Yeah, perhaps, particularly in the last few years it's been a little more challenging. But I think that's still, if it's a piece of it, it's just a piece. It's not the largest reason.
Right, and I know that that because we've done, because of our work experiences, but the people who are going to be voting on this
I understand.
May not get that nuance. And I think there's economic conditions that are a part of that as well.
Absolutely.
Where I'm trying to get to, or I think the presentation would be helpful to the uninitiated in the labyrinthine world of zoning bylaws, is this fear that this is going to unlock a whole bunch of unit construction.
Right.
And I can't say definitively that it won't, but based on my experience, the change in condition purported by 3A, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't make that as a declarative statement. Maybe I should say, I think we should analyze if the change precipitated by 3A would change the existing circumstances that has us where we are in terms of the numbers of units we have versus what could be built.
To throw my 2 bits in here, I'm going to go on the side of Sarah on this one, because I think it's meeting people with the language that's already there, in the sense that people have already heard the as of right words. But to your point, they haven't necessarily, or they don't believe that there's site plan review or other things. So putting those two in there, it's really defining it for people. And then to Stephen, your point, there'll be additional slides that explain it differently, like the prior slide that talked about the different numbers that can be built in different times. And then I'm going to switch over to Chris's point about having the CDP in there. I do think that's important. And I actually think it could be I don't think we need to do this, but you could literally add it to 1, 2, and 3. You could just say, provide additional housing type options per the CDP. And you could do the same thing for number 2 and number 3. I think it's because in terms of selling it to the community, that's what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to underscore that this is not as far a departure. I mean, well, it is a departure from what they know right now with zoning, but it's not nearly what people are thinking, that I believe personally, that it is actually within the CDP in all seriousness. So we need to show people that we are connecting the dots with those things as many times as we can.
I would just alter that a little bit and say, this is not consistent with people's perception of the current zoning. I think there's a huge difference between people's perception
Agreed.
allowed by zoning and what current zoning actually allows. And that's why we talked about doing this build out analysis of the current zoning. People would be shocked at what's actually allowed to be built without 3A.
Chris is absolutely right. And I think that, we've talked about this before, but I think we need to continue to underscore the point that 3A is not equal to every community. The way that 3A impacts the community has so much to do with the town's existing regulations, how it's laid out, what its development pattern is. And in the case of Ipswich, because of the way that we're established, 3A is not a radical departure, because that's the way we've set it up and that's the way we've allowed development for decades. So that gets lost on people because they just think of it as this, well, if it's 3A is bad here, it's got to be bad here, it's got to be bad here. No, it's not the case.
So Glenn, then how to do that, and I think is to tie it to Chris's point, is back to CDP, but it's also to be forthright about the by right. I think that's okay.
And I'm okay with that, as long as in the purpose statement, when we make the word say by right, even if we have it in the definition about site plan review, that we should stick site plan review in that first line, like including site plan review or something like that. Because I don't want the people to start out thinking there's no site plan review or there's no other review process. So if we do that, then I'm fine with it.
How powerful is site plan review?
Well, it's powerful enough. I mean, actually, Josh, one question I had for you is that in looking at the site plan review regulations that I think we're probably coming out, I believe we're coming out of the EOHLC model. They don't have, there's no public hearing process, for example, in there. We have a public hearing process with our site plan review, which I think is very important to have, and they have a more rapid turnaround that I think is undoable than what we're used to doing here. I think ours is like 45 days. I think it was just 20 days or something. So there's so I think that if as long as we're not being hamstrung by the state saying, yeah, you can do site plan review, but you got to do our site plan review and not what has worked in your community for decades, then I would say to you, Mariana, the answer is that it's at the end of the day, it's not really appealable. It can't be fully. It's not nearly as strong as a special permit as far as denying a use, but it has a significant impact on a project because it allows the planning board to look at issues relating to stormwater, to drainage, to the layout of the site, to the way that parking is set up, a whole host of issues that are very similar to what we do under special permit, except that it doesn't fully have the teeth. But it's pretty significant, and I think that's why we need to play it up.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with all the things that Glenn said, and having been a city planner in this kind of position before where there are things that you're allowed to do by right. Really, by right is just a legal term that says the board cannot prevent it from happening, but they can still negotiate in a public forum to say, hey, we need a little bit more landscaping here. We want to make sure that you're hitting all these other parts of the code that you need to. And something I'd like to remind the task force members of as well is that just about everything has some form of site plan review behind it. It's just a question of if it's an internal staff site plan review, like if someone's building a residential dwelling, or a lot of times even if there's just flat work to maybe they want to add a grill to the backyard, usually they need a permit for that. Sometimes that'll be reviewed by an engineer or somebody in the public works department to make sure it's legal and safe and compliant and things like that. So all the things that happen by right, you don't usually get to just go and do without somebody giving it an official stamp of approval. And that's for commercial stuff, like if you want to replace a sign that's on like a monument, an entrance to a shopping center or something like that, those all need permits, those all need approval and things like that as well. So there's always another check and balance somewhere. Nobody just gets the right to build whatever they want without somebody taking a look at it and making sure that it's legal and that it's okay. But that's the big difference with the site plan review by right, is that the site plan review authority cannot legally deny them the right to do the thing unless there's a profound legal reason behind it. So if they said, well, we don't want to build a fire lane, and we say, well, our code and the fire code says you have to, though, you could have the site plan review authority deny a permit based on a legal reason like that, but they can't do it just for the sake of saying, oh, we don't like this project, so you can't build it here.
That's all.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what I think we also need to roll in, and then I have a question for Josh, is referring to our own payment in lieu regulations that the planning board had worked on with the Affordable Housing Committee. And so my question to you, Josh, is you submitted this to EOHLC with their model. At what point, following this discussion, and maybe others, do you then make adjustments to what EOHLC is reviewing? Because I'd really hate for them to, a week before town meeting say, oh, well, we didn't ever look at that. So how does that work going forward here?
Yeah, as we iterate.
Changing the model to references to our existing bylaw.
And this is just to add to Carol, this is a very important point, and I think of all the things that we're trying to wrestle with and sort out, this is the biggest remaining hurdle. I mean, I've got recent correspondence from Charlie Allen, and if the way that this is proposed now, like for example, if we are forced to allow the 80% to be counted as our affordability level for rental, that would be a massive loss for the town, and probably likely would cause opposition to the whole mechanism from the housing folks, and maybe even myself. So that's something that we need to really sort of get our arms around, and I hope the answer, and things like requiring $400,000 as a payment in lieu for one unit, that's absolutely nutty, and that's not a workable option either. And doing the 10 units when we have 7 units now as our base, I don't think we can afford to dramatically shift the way that we're currently doing our affordability requirements. And so it's a big question. So sorry, Carol, but I just wanted to add to what you'd said.
Yeah, I think there's at least two big questions in those comments. One is about the process and the other is about affordability. I think I would set the affordability discussion aside a little bit and state what we've stated previously, which is it will be driven by the financial analysis, which is underway. And what that financial model analysis says, whether or not it, hits some of those points you just mentioned, Glenn, or not, we will basically have to follow what that analysis says, whether we like it or not. And I understand that there will be implications to that, but I don't think there's much flexibility there. So what it says, we'll have to react to and respond to as we get that information, decide how we want to proceed. Okay. In terms of the process, as we iterate, and we were anticipating that we would iterate, of course. I think it was good to get a version to EOHLC to start that clock ticking. John and I can be in contact with folks at EOHLC as we do iterate, and we'll have to gauge when to do this at the right moment, but we can contact them and politely ask if they have begun review of our materials yet, and if not, can we replace them with these other materials without resetting the clock? And so I think that's probably possible, and we don't want to do it, I don't think, like 4 times between now and some date in the future. But if there's a moment where we think the version we have is much better than the version we submitted on July 19th, then we should see if we can make that replacement. And so that would be the process to do so. It's a little, I don't know, a little in sort of behind the scenes and informal, but I think it's a possibility. And I think other communities have done that as well.
Yeah, and we would have, just by nature of the timeline, we would have to do that relatively quickly. I mean, I don't think it has to be done. I don't think it's achievable to do it by the end of this week, but certainly by the time that it comes around for planning board hearing on the 22nd, we would need to have really worked on not just this language, but all other aspects of the language. So that's a good thing too, that we wouldn't be asking for it like a week before they're expecting to give us a response.
Correct. And I imagine that with everything they have going on, that it will likely be the case that if we reach out, they will not have started the review, and
Yeah.
we can likely replace the materials. So just to move us along on this purpose statement and what I've heard, I will plan to and do this both in the purpose statement, but throughout this language. Whenever we say as of right, we would also say including site plan review, and we would just do a universal find and replace and make that so. And I think that what I'm hearing is that would be the approach. At least that's maybe what I'm determining. I'm going to break the tiebreaker if there is a tie.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. So let's continue. And I think we'll continue to think about reference to the CDP and if that can be enhanced. But I do think there's a very strong overlap between the CDP and what 3A is, even in the detail of the CDP suggesting that there should be by right multifamily in the central business district. So that is very detailed, and that is what we're doing. Moving down to the next section, this is just more sort of standard establishing the applicability and establishment of these the overlay districts and sub-districts. So it talks about what the MOD is to develop multifamily housing located within that overlay district, what the underlying or what the sub-districts are, excuse me, not underlying, what the sub-districts of the overlay are, and establishing that they're clearly overlays on top of the underlying zoning, that the underlying zoning is not impacted. So comments that we had here was one that we've already discussed, adding a good portion of Hammett Street to the mandatory mixed use, which we can explore. Conversation about a planned development in the MOD2. And I would say anything that is planned previously or even wants to come forward in the future through existing zoning will not, like if someone wants to do that, that is perfectly fine. It will not be impacted by these overlay zones. And also just take the time to make the point that compliance is all about the zoning that we're working on. It is not about unit production after the zoning is passed. So we do not need to be concerned about how a 40 unit development might or might not impact this. It really is not consequential. And then I guess similarly on the third point as well about plans for another project of any certain number of units or buildings or anything like that.
Josh, I was referring to what I just read to you about 15 minutes ago of the addresses for I think what the draft said, or 50 to 54 Market Street is actually, what did I say, 48 to 56 Market Street inclusive.
Okay.
So.
Thanks.
So what is this project that you're talking about, Carolyn? I can't hear you.
That's because I'm muted. The one on Washington Street.
Oh, the one that's already underway?
No.
Oh, 2 Washington Street?
Yeah, I think so. Sounds about right.
They're doing 5 large buildings? Is that right?
No. The third one is 48 to 54 Market Street.
So what is that?
It's the 2 buildings that I didn't want to be in the mandatory mixed use, which has a 0 lot line setback, because they have 50 feet of lawn in front of both of those homes. So I wanted that not to have to be, if somebody wants to do anything else with it.
Okay. So the 20 units is pretty much already there. They're only adding 5 units, right?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about
the
20...
addresses were wrong. That's all it was.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay. So the conclusions there, we will look at removing 48 to 56 Market Street from the MMU district. We'll look at adding some of Hammett Street to the MMU district, or all of Hammett Street if that's possible. And the other comments I don't think make a difference. So
Josh, does that help us on this whole issue of the MMU by taking those two out?
I think it would help us to add more of Hammett Street. Yes.
Oh, excellent. Good.
Okay. Otherwise, I think the establishment applicability is pretty like it's pretty standard. It just kind of establishes what's going on. The definitions is next, and it goes through definitions from A to S in this case, from affordable unit to subsidized housing inventory and everything in between. And some of the comments there were, I think, if I could summarize, about connecting those definitions to existing definitions where they exist, and we can do that review and make sure, for example, that defining how height is measured in the current zoning is reflected in this language, or we make reference to it, for example.
That makes sense, because we have a pretty extensive definition section, and I looked. I mean, a lot of these things aren't in there, so that's not going to be a problem. But there are a few areas that we need to be careful about. But that's easily done. It just needs to be done. That's all.
And we can put a note in the definition about UHLC about their successor agencies. I think that's a good point. I actually deleted they had also defined DHCD and UHLC separately. I thought that was a bit much, but I think adding successor agencies is good. And then in regard to area median income, and I think this is a conversation relative to the affordability requirements as well. So Ipswich is in the so-called Boston, Cambridge,
SMSA or something.
I think it's Boston, Cambridge, Newton, New Hampshire. There's a series of hyphenated locales that are the defined metropolitan statistical area, which upon which affordability is required. And so Ipswich is a part of that area. And I think the question of what that percentage should be is an open question that would be, again, a result of that analysis, whether that is, oftentimes, I think most typically you see 80%. AMI is how it's written, and that's the area median income based upon that statistical area. So I guess the clarification is that the Ipswich is in that area, and that will be a point of further clarification once we get the analysis back.
Yeah, just briefly on that, this has been a longstanding issue with the town. When we were first doing affordability back in the 90s, we had a project up on High Street, 9 units next to the new car wash is now, and we went through the LIP process with the state. We put a unit on, and we had it declared affordable. So when these units went out to the market, the units, the market units were being marketed at the same price as the affordable unit because of the variation between what's market here and what's market in Cambridge and Boston, which made no sense to us at all. It was just, why were we doing this when we weren't affecting the affordability in any way other than in name? So it was at that point in time that we went from the 80% to the 60%. We've kept the 80% for ownership, but for the rental, that's where the huge distinction was. And that's a big argument that we're making on the 200 unit Essex Pastures project, that the ZBA required that be 20, instead of 25% at 80, 20% at 60, because then you're at least getting something that looks like affordability if you're at 60%. So that's why that's such a huge issue for the town. But anyway, I just thought it'd be helpful for you to know that there's a significant history on that issue as it relates to what is really affordable in town, particularly as it relates to rental.
That's helpful context. Thank you. All right, so that's definitions. Any other thoughts about definitions? We did try to make sure their definition list in their model bylaw was quite extensive. We have trimmed it down to the ones that actually show up in our language. So we have done that exercise. We can do the exercise of comparing it to the other, the bylaws context definitions.
Excellent.
In terms of uses, it is pretty straightforward in that we aren't being too expansive. We have uses permitted as of right that will now in the future say as of right with site plan review. And then those uses include multifamily housing and mixed use development. The mixed use development is a requirement in the mandatory mixed use subdistrict MOD4. The questions and comments that we heard were whether we can encourage more retail uses and fewer services on the first floor. I don't think so, is the short answer. The next comment is trying to reread and remember what it is. Maybe whoever's its author could maybe expand on it a little bit. And then yes, I think what we've talked about is, yes, adding with site plan review throughout. So that's captured in the third bullet. Any additional context on the second bullet to help me out?
Whose comment was it?
Well, I'm trying to recognize it if it's mine. I think Chris and I were the only two who sent something in.
It's not mine.
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking is, probably the same practice is we should make as few changes as we can to make this more understandable to people. So that's what I was saying. Just make the changes that we're required to make, and nothing more, except, it seems like we have a lot to gain from it, which, anyway.
All right.
I've said.
Good. Sounds good. Dimensional standards is effectively looking at that table, which we shared previously, just sort of reformatted in a different way, which is now in the bylaw language. This is a excerpt from that table. It's in its full, there are additional characteristics in the full write-up in the draft bylaw. I will note that I should have noted in the comments here, from our previous task force meeting and discussion, we talked about exploring the minimum open space percentage, and that is something that we still have on our list to do. I do think that the minimum open space percent can increase from the 5%. It is 5% in the existing zoning today. That's what we've followed as the model. But that was a discussion from our last conversation. And then the other discussion was adding reference to setbacks, the existing exception for parking as it is laid out in the existing bylaw, and we can take a look at that reference and integrate that as well.
Well, that exception only applies for commercial uses, not for residential, just so you're aware.
Okay. Would you like it to apply to residential in this case?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I guess I have to think about that.
Yeah, we'll take a look at it to the specific.
I was thinking that this would apply to the the mandatory mixed use, where there's a commercial, providing parking for the commercial piece of it.
Well, yes, in that instance, there's no question that you don't have to provide for commercial.
I have no changes with what's on the screen. I just wanted to go back because some other people have asked questions about the maximum feet for buildings and how we ended up with that. So I was just going to discuss it briefly with this one statement. Was, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, the reason that we landed at the 45 feet was partially because that's where we were at for density needs, and that we wouldn't need to add more floors, essentially another floor, because we were going to meet the density required without doing so, which would then be more in keeping with the town's character. Does anyone disagree with that?
The 45 and the 37 are the numbers which are used in the current underlying
Current.
zoning.
But we just didn't raise it because we don't need to with the numbers that you're gathering from the compliance modeling.
Yeah, the compliance modeling, actually, the expression of height as feet is invisible to the compliance model. It is based upon stories.
Got it.
So for compliance modeling, it's relatively inconsequential. I think 3 stories and 45 feet provides a good amount of flexibility for how a developer and their design team might resolve the need for perhaps a taller ground floor if they wanted to have a commercial or non-residential use. It would also allow them to have, variety on roof forms and et cetera. I think they can do quite a bit within 45 feet for a 3-story structure.
And those numbers were current zoning, correct?
Yes,
Well,
those are.
It should be noted that in the existing bylaw in the CB district, by special permit, the planning board can allow for 4 stories rather than 3, as long as it doesn't exceed the 45-foot height maximum. That's existing language in our bylaw.
So do we want to apply that here as well? Because right now in the 3A, that wouldn't be allowed.
I think we should.
It's a good idea. That increases our density, wouldn't it, Josh? It's not going to be a negative impact.
Well, I think it's not a negative depending on who you ask. I think that it would, I mean, increasing to 4 stories in MOD1 would increase the capacity figures. I think it's a reasonable question whether or not that is desired or
so if we go back to Glenn's point, would a special permit be required to get to the 4th story?
I think if we did it, I think it would be difficult to sell that if it wasn't that, because the idea was just it had to be a particular circumstance where the argument could be made where it made sense to do that 4th story.
So that circumvents the by right piece.
Right. That's what circumvents. Well, unless you have a note that's saying that's, I don't know how that would play out with 3A, whether you can do special permit things that are above and that you meet the requirements without it. I don't know. Do you have a response to that, Josh?
Yes, we could add it into the MOD, the multifamily overlay district language, that there would be special permit circumstances which would allow additional entitlements, that they would not impact the compliance modeling in any way in that case, because they would be beyond the compliance model is based upon the as of right with site plan review circumstances. So there's nothing that says we couldn't allow even more by special permit within our draft zone, and we could do so. I think to me, the question is there a benefit in providing that mechanism through our proposed zoning, or is it fine enough just to leave that mechanism through the existing underlying zoning, which is still in place?
Yeah, and I'm not saying we need that, but that may be the right approach.
I would agree, because at least for the couple exercises we've already done, the maximum density for those sites is easily achieved with 3 stories. So even if you added a 4-story, you would exceed the maximum zoning allowed in that 3A district.
Okay, but that may be the answer then.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. If we were to do that, I think you'd also have to include with that special permit an increase in density, and we might want to like model what that looks like. But otherwise, what you'd be doing is essentially forcing them to build larger apartments to get an additional story, and it kind of, it's just a wash at that point.
Right. Sorry, Tony, I interrupted you.
Can't hear you, Tony.
Sorry. You want to put it in the chat?
Okay, so we will review this reference in the comments and also explore the open space as was previously discussed. The next section is off-street parking, and it defines the number of minimum parking spaces per unit, the number of bicycle parking spaces, under what circumstances bicycle storage would be included, and then a potential for shared parking reduction with the mixed-use development. And just to underline again that the 3A does not allow us, we're in the mandatory mixed-use district, it does not allow us to have additional parking requirements for the non-residential uses. So the parking requirements are all based upon the residential uses.
And we don't have any anyway. We don't allow that. We don't require any additional parking for commercial in the CB. And in the GB, it's 500 feet. So I think everything is pretty much covered in our MMU. What would be our MMU?
Correct. And then some of the comments were about the off-street parking requirements. I would just maybe clarify that we do have off-street parking requirements. And then the bicycle parking requirements, that there's a threshold in terms of the units where that kicks in. And I think bringing that down to 10 units is appropriate. We've brought the threshold for some of the other mechanisms down to 10 units. So I think that's a reasonable change. Other thoughts about parking requirements? I know we've talked a lot about them in past meetings. Okay, I'll keep moving along. And then general development standards, which are the standards for site plan review. In this outline does follow the OHLC outline. And I think the major exercise here is to compare it to the town's current site plan review standards and requirements, which we will do. And then additional comments that did occur were coordination of renewable energy language, which I gather is likely a reference to language that's in the existing bylaw with design guidelines, coordinating lighting language with the underlying zoning language, which we will look at. I do think we did change. I'll have to check. I think I made a change where there was no threshold for these standards to kick in, that it was all projects. So I think I did make that change before we submitted it to UHLC, but I'll double check that. So I agree with that. And then is there, the last comment is there are a number of issues here that will need justification in committee's discussion. I assume you look through our special permit requirement or site, I guess it's site plan requirements. And so I think that is the exercise that needs to be completed. So if there are specific, I guess the clarification maybe to get here is that when we do that comparison, we should be defaulting to the current language wherever such a conflict might occur. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the more we can, reference stuff that we've got in our bylaw. So if we're able to more or less just say subject to site plan review as as provided in section 9 or 10 of the bylaw, that I think it simplifies certainly what we're doing in this thing. And if it doesn't run afoul of any requirements of 3A, why not?
Josh and Glenn, that's actually a question I have, is that should it not be that it points to bylaws, so that if we change a bylaw to the overall zoning, it automatically changes to the 3A? Otherwise, we'd have to change both if there were changes in the future. Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
I'm not sure if I fully understand your question. On that site plan review, I think it's simply since we already have a site plan review mechanism, why not just refer to that and not try to replicate, which is what this is doing here. But I'm not sure what's the other part of your.
Well, I think you're both saying the same thing.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
to your point, Pete, that was my comment too, because if you change it in one and forget to change it in the other, and then there's a conflict, then that just creates
Yep.
all sorts of issues when special.
Oh, right. Right, that's an advantage. Yes, that's an advantage of doing the referral out, because then.
Right.
Yeah, the language has to report back to one or the other. It can't be both.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you. And then this is, so the affordability requirements are in many ways a placeholder, though we did put in 15% as the requirement, which is consistent with the town's overall requirements, although we didn't adjust the AMI requirements as you have them. I think what we were trying to do here with this early submission is basically just signal that we will be pursuing more than the 10%. Then that will be supported, hopefully, by the economic feasibility analysis. And then we will tie the other details of this section to that analysis, which is forthcoming, including, I believe that analysis also does get into the supportable amount for the fee in lieu of, so that will be also subject to that analysis.
Josh, can you confirm that the economic feasibility study is in process, or we've requested that it be initiated?
Yes, it is in process. It is through our other colleagues of ours at MAPC. They have the pre-adoption package, which also was sent to EOHLC, which was one of the final critical pieces that they need, which is the more concrete definition of the sub-districts and their characteristics, which are the same package that you all received and that we sent to EOHLC. So they are using that to plug into the models which they have for affordability and feasibility. They have reported back to us that this is not standard, quote unquote, that they, with the mandatory mixed use and its sort of the context within downtown Ipswich or town center, it's there are nuances to this analysis which make it a little less boilerplate than some of the others which they have performed. So
good or bad?
I don't know if it's necessarily good or bad. I think it was them signaling to us like they're not going to give us results next week. I think that they have their work cut out for them. What I have made clear, which they have not promised to me, but I've made clear at least that the hope is that we would have the results of this analysis, not the full, I've made clear we don't need the full write-up and report, but we would love to have the analysis results in terms of the numbers in advance of the public hearing on the 22nd, on August 22nd, which is coming right along. But that, I know this is a sensitive topic, and I know that it would be very important for us to hopefully have that information at that time. So they are trying to do what they can to do so.
Okay, great.
Josh, can we see what the standards are that they're looking at in this financial analysis? I mean, I feel like it's this black box that nobody quite knows what's going on, but they're going to come out with a number and you're okay or you're not okay. So I think it would be useful for the committee to be able to see what is in the black box. One, and do you have a copy of our regulations for payment in lieu that you can share with them so they know what we're working off?
Are they separate? Are they included in the bylaw language, or are they separate?
They're separate regulations. Yeah.
It might be beneficial for you to send those along.
Can you do that, Glenn?
Well,
I mean, is it your job? I mean, I could send them if.
Well, I don't know, Andrea, do you have easy access to them? I don't want to give you a lot of work on your last week.
Sorry, someone walked into the office. Could you say that again, Glenn?
Yeah, do you have easy access to the regulations regarding the affordability, the payment in lieu regulations?
Yes.
Josh not sure he's ever seen those, so we thought if we could send those along to him, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, that would be good. And then, Carolyn, to your question, yes, we can send previously completed EFA analyses and the reports that they produced for other towns at this point. So I can send along some of those examples so you can at least see what that output looks like for another community.
Thanks, Josh.
Josh, can you remind me about the requirements of the law without the feasibility analysis and regarding to the percent of AMI? I know that we can't go over 10% of the units being designated affordable without the feasibility analysis. Is that 80% changeable, or is that the minimum regardless of the EFA?
I believe that it's 10% to 80% AMI is the sort of standard, and any increase in percent of affordability or the depth of affordability requires the EFA. So even if you were at 10% but required 60% AMI, that would also require an EFA, I believe.
Okay, well, that's good news, and that there does seem to be at least a pathway. Now, whether that pathway is achievable is another question, but if there was no pathway, then we'd be screwed. So that's good to know.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, so this is, I think perhaps of all the areas that are continuing to be points of discussion, this is probably the largest set of unknowns, is the affordability provisions.
Absolutely. That's the piece that I'm most concerned about, frankly.
Site plan review is actually very similar to what we just discussed about the site plan development standards, in that we will review and shift this to be more aligned with the town's language as it already exists. It is currently based upon the UHLC language, and Glenn, you've already pointed out some of the specific differences between the two, and we will again have our as we go through that, have our default be to revert back to the town's version.
Excellent. Good.
And I think that's mostly what the comments here are about, except the lighting comment, which is discussing full cutoff light fixtures and prohibiting spotlights, which we can add in if that is not yet in the current language.
Well, it is in the bylaw. We have a pretty
in
site plan review. There's specific language about that, so we may not need that. If we're referring to the site plan review stuff, I think we're probably okay. But anyway, if you need any help sorting out any of that, you can let us know. But.
Okay. And then the last is just a standard legal provision where if any of the provisions or language or sections or sentences, et cetera, are found to be invalid, then the remainder remain in effect, which is a pretty standard provision. Other thoughts about that package? So we'll just talk now about design guidance. So in addition to that package, there will be a complementary and supplemental set of design guidance. And that design guidance will be a document which is an instrument of the planning board's review. And so therefore is not, I think it will be, our ambition and desire is to get this package established and drafted so that it can be known to the planning board and to the town as this moves toward town meeting, but it does not require a town meeting approval in the same way that a zoning change does. So this is as an instrument to the planning board, it would be adopted by the planning board in their own on their own timeline. These are just the principles which are consistent with this process, which we've heard, to elevate the quality and design of projects which would come through 3A, emphasize sustainability, fit with the character and context of the town, and encourage specific housing types. So again, thinking about the Northeastern study, we can provide some guidance around how the buildings are resolved in their roof form, and how the maximum height relates to the pitches of roofs and the use of dormers and et cetera. I think that is the right place for some of that guidance. We have introduced language about a maximum building footprint in the MOD 3 subdistrict, but not in the other 3 subdistricts because we didn't think that they were necessarily needed, given the context of footprints largely filling up their lot in many of the historic context and building circumstances. I think the guidelines can also provide guidance about breaking down building mass to be historically sensitive, not having sort of unbroken building forms that are longer than 40 feet, for example, or we'll look at the context buildings that we're about to talk about in a minute. And then also some additional guidance around parking, about the screening of parking, how curb cuts and access to that parking occurs. Parking, of course, is occurring behind buildings. I think that's a very critical part of this context in the town center of Ipswich, and which is a pattern which already exists. So all of that language would be there. This is just a reminder of the current visual preferences which were received from the community, which we can build upon these images, but not all of these structures are within the districts which have now been more concretely defined. So we can build upon these, but do seek your additional suggestions of exemplar buildings within the districts which are now established. So that's the question before you right now. Here are some shots of buildings which are within the districts, which I think are, have pleasing design elements which we could build upon in guiding the resulting built form here. Any additional thoughts from you all about buildings to add to our list?
I'm good with this. I think there was one in the prior slide of a brick building, which wouldn't be bad to put in there as a reference, because there are other brick buildings. I know they're factory buildings, but yeah, that's not on the next slide. So I didn't know if that makes a difference.
Okay.
Well, that and the Tyler block, which is brick too, right?
I was going to mention that one as well. So the other element that exists in the downtown is sort of the 2.5 story that you have here with the Sullivan Insurance Agency. It's kind of like this blue building that you have with the jewelry. So it's sort of a modified sort of colonial style. That and the other 19th century buildings like the Tyler block and the Choke Bridge. So they're kind of two different, probably overarching styles.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that what we would be providing is not necessarily a judgment that one of those two approaches is better than the other, but more guidance that if you do have a full 3 stories to a flat roofed parapet, that, for example, as you look at the example of the Choke Bridge pub on the left here, that you would have a well-defined parapet at the top of that 3-story wall, and that you'd have a differentiation between a ground floor and the 2 upper floors. So those would be the types of things that we would be talking about in the guidelines. And then with a more of a 2.5 story pitched roof structure with dormers on the pitched roof, which would create the 3rd floor space, be talking about some of those character features of that building type as well. So it would be, both are allowed, and it would be up to, they're both a part of the context today. It would be up to the specific project and development team to decide which approach they're taking, but then we would help guide them to a context sensitive result, no matter which choice they went with.
Yeah, I mean, a consistent mixed use ground floor or first floor is really kind of essential. There's kind of a lack of consistency in that right now that I see, but the Caldwell building is just such a gorgeous building. You know, if we have certain exemplars, I think that would be one. The arched windows are also seen. If you look at the old fire station, also, you know, is kind of delightful in terms of its embellishments and shapes. So, yeah.
I would also suggest the Wind Hill building, which I think is to the right of this one with the jewelry, is another good example. A smaller scale version.
That's a relatively new building that was done.
Well, so are these two in the middle.
Oh, right, that's true.
They're actually newer than that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure about using the blue one as a good example.
One concern I have that I think the tan building, the one from the right, is that it's an attractive building, but the site is completely surrounded. It's like Somerville. It's completely surrounded by asphalt, and there was a new, I think, two family put in behind this building. Also, not a bad looking building. Has a heat pump at ground level. And I was over, this is right next to the Cumberland Farms. I was over at Cumberland Farms one day putting air in my tires. And here's a family with a child sitting on the asphalt right next to the heat pump. And I thought, okay, this is not how we want people to have to live in town. I think we need to be careful of the amenities around some of these buildings, not just what they look like. Okay, so that's number one. But and how that gets factored into site plan review decisions, but we need to think about it. But the other question I would have for Glenn is, we currently have a 30+ page design guidelines. Does that differentiate by zoning district in the way that Josh was talking about?
Which are you referring to, the design guidelines that support the design bylaw section in the zoning, or the document that Cecil and Risby did years ago?
I guess I'm probably talking about the consultant done one. I thought it was done for the design review committee.
We didn't have anything that was done by a consultant for the design review committee. That was done internally by various folks.
Okay. There's a very long document on design review. And I'm wondering how that cuts through what Josh is talking about here. Because it seemed to me it does. I don't know. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about
I think Andrea just posted the
I see.
So that's the DRB application, and the standards and guidelines for the design review board start on page 7. So it speaks through height, proportions, landscape, etc. Is that what you're referring to, Carolyn?
I don't know. Is it in the chat?
Yes.
How many pages does that have, Andrea? I don't remember. I didn't remember that being 30 pages.
It also includes some of the application pages, but the guidelines themselves are at least 20+.
Okay. All right. So what was your question about those, Carolyn? Whether or not,
Well, I was asking if it went by zoning district, which is what
no, no,
Josh was talking about. But does Josh have a copy of this?
I do now, yeah.
Okay, great.
I feel like, and I guess it's an important question for us to get your opinion on right now, is that what we have heard from our discussions together is that we would have a set of design guidelines which are specific to 3A that may be consistent with aspects of the document which you already have, but that I think we would endeavor to make a little more simple and succinct, while also having it be more illustration and visual, picture-based than entirely dependent on the written word.
More pictures, less words.
yeah, that sounds all right to me.
I mean, in terms of the town, I would encourage them to update the existing guidelines with this new version with more pictures and less words and district-based rather than global.
It may be challenging to do that prior to town meeting, though.
Well,
So,
I'm thinking long-term.
yeah, okay, yeah,
Yeah, they really both should speak the same language.
Yep.
sure, for sure, yeah.
This is an example of a recent set of design guidelines we put together in downtown Canton, which did, I think, offer some. It wasn't entirely, there's still words, of course, describing the principles, but those principles were then keyed to a series of diagrams which tried to help make the points visually about what the principles were that are being described. So I think a similar approach here, I think, would be the approach that we would suggest, and that we can compare the more simple outline that we have on this slide, which is really to focus on site design, getting at the character around the buildings from one of the main principles and areas of exploration for the guidelines. And then the other would be the frontage and relationship of that property to the public realm and how it's expanding and building upon places to have, sidewalk circulation, outdoor seating, et cetera. And then the building itself, in much the way we've just been describing, whether it comes to a pitched roof or a flat roof, how you break down the mass of a larger structure, the relationship then of the facades, windows, doorways, and the various embellishments that could occur on the facade. So those would be the key areas of inquiry in the guidelines. And then I think we might want to add some additional language to get at sustainability, which has been talked about a lot in our previous conversations too. So
to clarify, Josh, sorry, just to go back to what the existing guidelines are, do they have anything like this currently? I have admittedly not looked at them. Okay. So I think that this is a really important thing as a selling of the whole process, that we get this ready before a town vote, if possible.
Yeah, I think it's possible.
I mean, should we have like a smaller, subgroup kind of work on a draft and then?
Well, my expectation was that we were going to have something, but I was just speaking to the point about trying to.
Oh, no, I know what you're saying, Glenn. To Sarah's point, is this something that like the util team is and their design giving review to, but they need our input? So is someone already doing that?
I don't think they're doing.
I doubt it, unless MAPC is doing it, and I don't think so.
No. Okay. So then how do we do this?
Yeah, that's my question, right? What's the process and how do we get involved in,
Well, the planning office is obviously in a pretty difficult position right now with Andrea leaving in a few days and no director. So
sounds like it could be done by the end of the week.
All right.
No, but in all seriousness, so how do we, is it the kind of thing like Sarah just was starting to say? Do we need to create a subgroup that reviews other towns, how they've done it, so that we can get it moving?
I think we can, there are some reasonably close examples. They're not exactly Ipswich's character, but I think like the example that we have on the screen here, we can provide some of those examples which would provide a solid basis to go through and say, like, you know, this type of guideline is a good one, this type of guideline we don't need. And you could come up with a collection that way. I think that the missing feature a little bit, which might be able to be filled in by the Northeastern team, but that remains to be clarified, is sort of the visuals which would go along with that language, I think is the critical missing feature, which we may also be able to contribute some to, but I hesitate to promise without checking our budget. So, so that could be something potentially that we are a part of as well.
Does that make sense that this group moves and has meetings separately from you, Josh, to keep that moving? I'm not saying separately from you to keep you out of anything. I'm just saying, how do we got to find a way to move this along pretty quickly now?
Yeah, I think if maybe a reasonable step would be I send examples, a group or subgroup or the whole group meets and goes through those examples and kind of sends back a version that says, like, we really like these things, we don't need those other things as much. And then we could, from those examples, basically put together a first cut of sort of the provisions of a design guidelines that would be involved, and maybe even some, like, when, you know, this type of diagram would be useful here. And then we could see, I think you could get pretty close to the composition of this document, maybe without having it fully finalized or resolved, but you could at least get the pieces of it together to, I think, have it available for reinforcing that this is coming along, and that the town will have this as a supplement for review as projects come forward under the new zoning.
I think that's doable based on like the presentation that the UTL team did that I was on, that actually had like the bullet points that are on the screen right now, right? And more. So that if we just sort of take that and then Ipswichize it in some way, I'm not saying it's that easy, but at least to get a first pass at it, to your point.
Yep.
So I agree with all that. My question is, who's doing what? What's FPC doing? What's the Northeastern team doing? And what are we contributing? And how is that all being coordinated? It sounds like we have a few cooks in the kitchen here.
And some cooks are very busy.
Well, I'm assuming all the cooks are busy.
Yeah.
But we also have no head chef. So I mean, that's my question that maybe we should roll into this, is how do we all see how the communication is going to go between Josh and we and amongst ourselves getting us to town meeting?
Good question.
So I'll jump in here. To my understanding, Glenn is going to take a formal role on in supporting this work. So Glenn, I don't know if you can speak to the conversations you've had with the town manager, but Glenn will be kind of leading this. So, regarding communication, Glenn is going to kind of fill some of that. As it relates to the cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, to be clear, like, MAPC is supporting this project for the town and with us. I think the Northeastern group is a study that is providing support to us, and ultimately they're doing their own research on our community, but they have also agreed to support that to the extent possible, particularly with visualization. So I think it's really, so insofar as, like, if what we would, what we may find beneficial is them helping, either provide us with examples or even possibly do some specific visualizations for the community, we would ask them to do that. Does that make sense, given the conversations that we've had, Josh, with them?
I think it does. I think that if we could, as a group, come up with the that shorter list of design guideline type provisions and clauses that make sense, and then maybe even send those to the Northeastern team and ask them if they have or could create visualizations that reflect the context of Ipswich that would make some of those points. Like, I think then you basically have a set of design guidelines with those two pieces.
That's what I got out of what they were doing. So to your point, then I think we do have sort of marching orders, is that, like Josh, you said, you send us on the team, including Glenn, obviously, what you just had on the screen and some more things, and then our team has to meet and figure something out. Give it back to you maybe to review before Northeastern team.
Yeah, and I might even, potentially could send you a first cut of things that I think are the critical clauses as well. So like send you the example documents and pull from those to say, like, we need to hit these 10 things or whatever.
And then other things can follow after that, as long as we hit the first 10. Yeah.
Just for the group, I did have some preliminary conversations with the town manager too, with the shift in staff. I can also I can be helpful to be a go-between or helpful in any way that you need, that this group needs. Whether I can help Glenn, I can help coordinate, I can be a point person for this group.
Yeah, I do want to say that Andy is correct in that there is a person that's been hired by the town, Eve Tapper, who's putting in about 10 hours a week, and her job is mainly to make sure that planning board operation kind of continues on fairly smoothly. So it was discussed that any hours that I might put in would be related mostly to 3A, but it's not a lot. I'm not in a position where, like I was last year, where I was putting in 20 hours a week. So it's going to be pretty minimal. So I don't know that I'm going to have a lot of opportunity to sort of guide any kind of design review process. But I'm not saying I can't play some kind of role, but I don't want to get people to get an outsized expectation about what I'm able to achieve during the hours that I'm putting in, because it's still supposed to. The 10 hour, the main show is supposed to be right now mainly Eve's at 10 hours, and I would put in a few hours here and there, sort of helping with, particularly with a focus on 3A, because I've been involved in it, and it would makes the most sense for me to work on that. So to the extent that design works, I could do some of that on design. That's fine, but that's about the amount that I could handle. So.
Seems like what? Go ahead, Chris.
Take a role too in the design guidelines, of course. I won't be putting in 20 hours a week, but
25?
We'll see about that.
In addition, though, Sarah, I think, obviously there's a lot that Andrea did, and is doing this week. In terms of like being able to get all this information and all these meetings up on websites, is that something that you'll be able to manage?
Yep.
Or getting people to manage in the future?
Yep.
So that type of admin, to my understanding, that type of admin work is going to largely be undertaken by the new zoning board admin, who as of July 1 has been made a full-time position and is also supporting the planning department. So what you're speaking about, Pete, like noticing meeting minutes, that type of literal admin that I've been doing, frankly, for the couple of years I've been here, in lieu of an actual admin for the department, will be taken on by that person, which, had I not been departing, I think would be the intent anyway. So just, to level set that, I'm meeting with her to sort of transfer that procedural knowledge, and that should really be covered.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I was going to say something to Glenn, who isn't there, but I think while the design guidelines are really important, I think, with what we have up on the screen here now is like, how do we get to move forward and improving bylaw so that we meet some of, Glenn, I was just saying what I think is important, should be your priority.
It's working on the bylaw
Yeah,
in conjunction with with MAPC. Yeah.
Right, and getting it to all of these the stages of dates and whatnot, but also of, as the bylaw draft changes, getting it back to the committee, which Andrew was just saying that there's a new admin, zoning planning board admin person who would be.
Yep. Yep. And also, of course, working with the planning board on that component. So, for example, there's a meeting on Thursday, which is when the board will be discussing this, and I will be at that primarily for the 3A discussion. Eve's going to be there too for the other issues under discussion. So.
Good.
And I think we could, I think in some ways we kind of have to get as much of the things we've discussed tonight accomplished before Thursday, so that you can have the benefit of an updated version in that conversation as this moves through the planning board.
Yeah.
As we had established about a week ago through Andrew's vacation, I think what we'll probably shift to, if it's okay with the group, is that MAPC, primarily through me, will send emails directly distributed to this group, the 3A task force.
Yes.
And then beyond that, we'll rely on Glenn or others to then move that information along to the planning board or other parties that need it. But we would, instead of just dealing through Glenn, who then we would expect to distribute, we'll distribute to the task force directly, so you all get the information at the same time.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Okay. So that is the process that's in front of us, and we will keep moving as and iterating through it all. And of course, as happens, and we would expect that the planning board and their discussion and their members will have questions, thoughts, and ideas about how the draft bylaw language can be improved as well. And so there will be a series of iterations that continue, is what the expectation would be. We would like to, if it complies with your schedules, set another task force meeting. Tentatively, we've identified August 20th, which would be just in advance of the public hearing. So we would have the benefit of having this conversation gone through the planning board and the select board, referring back to the planning board, and be able to reflect and share with each other those conversations in that meeting, and then see if there are other, any other information that's come forward, for example, from the EFA analysis or other conversations, just to bring that all together. And then would also suggest scheduling at some point in September or even early October a task force meeting, which would be more geared toward a community question and answer session, for which we would all be present and could offer support for the recommendations as they're moving toward town meeting. Thoughts on those next steps?
I'm available the 20th.
Me too.
I'm available the 20th, and that makes sense to me, what you've laid out here.
I'm wondering if we should schedule another meeting before then to discuss purely the design guidelines.
Good point.
either in a small subset or the full group.
I think we can do a lot through email too.
Yeah, maybe we wouldn't need a full group to do that. But I don't know. I'm game
I
either
think
way.
it's always good to have a conversation face to face rather than just email, but.
And email, we get slippery with deliberation.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah, can't do that.
My private sector side.
Just to be clear, Sarah, are you talking about before a meeting on the 20th or before a meeting in September?
I think before the 20th,
Yep.
you're muted there.
Sorry.
Oh.
I was thinking before, in the next week or two, prior to the 20th, a group of us or all of us could meet to, if Josh is going to send us some samples, and we could start to dig into, the particulars, because I totally agree with the group. I think those guidelines are the crux of this conversation for folks. If we can show people, some of the guardrails around the design, that's going to, I think, assuage some of the fears and concerns.
Would something like the 12th or 13th give us time to think about it, get the information from Josh, and then meet about it?
Well, that's the first question, Josh, is when can you
Yeah.
get us something?
Yeah.
Well, I can send you package up design guideline examples and send them to you likely tomorrow. I probably won't, I don't know if I'll have time to go through and kind of give you the top 10 hit list tomorrow, but I can certainly send you some previous examples that you can start getting a feel for the different, in a lot of ways you'll see a fair amount of overlap in the types of design guideline language between the examples.
Maybe we could, if we got those from Josh, maybe we could meet like the end of next week, like the 8th or something.
I'll be away. Not that I need to.
You're essential, Pete.
Thanks for nothing, Pete.
I'm happy to be there. I'm away the 7th, 8th, 9th though, so that's
okay.
He's no? Out there? Okay.
could do the 6th.
I have a tri-board at 7. I could meet earlier, like at 6 o'clock.
Or the 5th, so it can be before.
I have a select board meeting on 5th, but I could meet before that.
What about tomorrow night?
Okay, I'll get.
I could probably.
Well, would
I
that
could-
following week be too late? Like the 12th or 13th, like Pete originally suggested?
We could, if we don't have a quorum, we could meet like on Wednesday or Thursday night of this week. If we don't have a quorum. What's our total head count for the task force?
I think it's 8.
8, but we would need to post a notice, so it couldn't be Wednesday, but it could be Thursday. Tony is messaging. She can do the 5th, 9th, 12th, or 13th. She is not available the week of the 20th, so will not be able to attend a meeting, that meeting pre-planning board. Just to throw that out there.
If
But
we
Andrea-
did do it. Oh,
But
sorry,
Andrea,
go
if
ahead.
we don't have a quorum, it doesn't need to be posted, right? It's just a subgroup of us?
Okay, so this is where, like, to be
Yeah.
honest, I'm not quite sure that your group is even subject to the open meeting law. But we've been operating as if it
Yeah.
is, to be fully transparent and,
Sure.
do all proper over noticing. So
Sure.
subcommittees are also considered subject to the open meeting law if they're appointed by the full committee. So if it's on a topic about which we're currently discussing and a subgroup is, are you not, that's my understanding. So like when the
Well, I
planning,
think you can do like a little working group, but I mean, a formal subcommittee just to work on.
no, working
okay.
groups are like subcommittees. This has been,
Okay. Okay,
Josh,
that's fine.
I don't know if you're aware, but it's
I think
this is
this
another
is,
like slippery slope when you're talking
I
about email communication and stuff. Working groups are technically considered, like, no matter what you name them, they are subject to the open meeting law. If it's discussing something that the group is sort of, the larger group would normally be involved with.
So could we do, so if we did post, we could
Thursday
post,
work.
we could post for Thursday.
Yes.
Or
the
do we have
planning board
folks-
does have a meeting at 7 p.m. that night.
Who does?
Planning board.
Yeah, I think this would be of interest to the community. So for transparency's sake, be important.
What time is planning board? 7?
7 p.m. So could folks do earlier than that?
I'm freely
What day are
available.
we talking about?
This
Except-
Thursday, the 1st, Glenn, before
No,
the.
I'm out for the rest of this week. So. But I honestly, I feel like I have little to contribute to this topic. So if you want to meet without me, feel free.
Who's available? Can you put your little hand up on the Zoom if you're available to meet on August 1st?
What time are we talking?
5
Chris
o'clock.
can't. If Chris can't, that'll be tough.
Oh, is Chris not available? Where's Chris?
Yeah, Monday works better for me. Monday, Tuesday.
Okay.
Monday, the 5th, Tuesday, the 6th.
I could meet at 5 o'clock on Tuesday, the 6th, before the tri-board. Does Tuesday, the 6th work for folks?
I could do that, I think.
Was that when
Would-
Tony said she couldn't, Andrea?
I would need to check in
Oh, maybe.
with I'm usually on grandparent duty in Grafton, but I could probably arrange to be there at 5 o'clock. I mean to attend a meeting at 5 on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like we have.
Can you indicate as to whether or not you could do that time on Tuesday? Are you looking it up?
What did you say, Andrew?
Are you talking to me?
No, Tony.
Oh, sorry.
Like a thumbs up or a thumbs down would be great. Yeah, thumbs up. Okay. Yes, she said she can. She just messaged. Okay. So that was just Ken. Can anyone else not attend on Tuesday, the 6th?
I can't. I can't.
You cannot, Carolyn. Okay. Anyone else? So it sounds like everyone else can attend, so it would be Ken and Carolyn who cannot attend. Ken, it sounds like you're okay with that. Carolyn, would you be amenable?
Well, I mean, if everyone could see the documents ahead of time and submit their feedback that we could have ahead of time for conversations. So if Ken and Carolyn want to submit to me their feedback ahead of that meeting on Tuesday, I can bring it to the meeting as for discussion. Once Josh shares the samples and such.
So this is in person,
Mm-hmm.
select board meeting room?
I'll have to find a room.
Okay.
Because it'll be set up for tri-board, so it may not be conducive. Well, it might be. I'll have to think about that. I don't know. I can talk to Andrea and.
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up. It looks like anything would be open. So tri-board's set up with the audience seating, obviously starting at 7. So if you'd want to sit in that setup, they could, facilities could do it earlier for 5, or we could just book meeting room C, which is available starting at 5.
But we'd want it recorded, right, for the community?
Yep. ICAM can on a limited basis set up in room C, but it would be much easier just to do room A where they're already going to plan to be. So if we, you can make do with the tri-board setup, then that would be ideal.
Might be nice to have a hard stop time.
Yeah.
All right, let me look at it right now.
Okay.
So are we talking 5 or 6?
We were talking 5.
Okay. 5 to 6 or 5 to 7?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the stop sign is 5 to 7? That's okay. I just
Well, I
wanted
mean,
to-
tri-board starts at 7, so yeah, it'll be done before 7.
Okay, got it. That's fine. That works.
Yeah, so I think it's good that we're doing it then because that gives at least a half of a chance to get something drawn, maybe if we need it by the 20th.
Yeah, because maybe we can come up with some things and then, show them back to Josh and John, and then push them to, the Northeastern group.
Right. Or the guy that keeps saying more pictures, less words could draw something.
Yeah, start drawing, Chris. Doctor.
Wait, what?
Bring your photos.
Or pictures, less words, yes.
Yeah, right.
Thanks for doing this, Sarah.
No problem.
I would also say, I mean, it's not ideal, but there could be, I mean, I think we could find either pictures or placeholder type graphics could be there in a document which is sort of ready for town meeting with the longer ambition of getting, higher quality custom illustrations created by someone at some point.
Yep.
Okay, I'm available for a 20th meeting too. Did we already
Yeah,
confirm that for everybody?
So it sounds like it's just Tony that can't make a meeting on the 20th, which is a Tuesday.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll
Tony's going to be intimately involved with this, obviously, given it going to the planning board on Thursday. So hopefully it won't. I mean, I don't think it will be that. It is pretty quick. It's wait a minute. So does that mean you're going to be missing the planning board meeting on the 22nd? Oh, Glenn, are you aware of that?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Just to confirm that you and or Stephen or Eve are aware that Tony is not going to be at the planning board meeting on August 22nd.
Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I talked with Tony and she wasn't sure at the time. So you will definitely not be there? No?
No, Mitch is taking her place. She's taking her daughter to school that week.
Okay, well, we'll just have to deal with it.
Okay. All right, so then we'll confirm the 20th, Josh. I booked the room A for next Tuesday, the 6th. I'm sending the recording request to ICAM and we'll have the agenda posted, which could be revised by the end, which actually, no, I'll have it posted by Friday. And then the 29th, the 22nd, excuse me, the 20th. I'm getting confused with all these dates I'm looking at. The 20th of August, Tuesday, we'll also book room A with ICAM and get that all set up.
The August 20th meeting is another meeting of this task force, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
prior to the 22nd, which is the first planning board public hearing.
Right, and that the August 20th is a usual or 7 p.m. time. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And I will follow up to this meeting with just clarity on all of this so we are crystal clear and are on the same page.
Okay, sounds good.
And I know that you all have put in yeoman's effort this evening, but the additional point that was to be made in this section was that we're shifting and beginning to think about outreach and engagement with the broader community, and sort of while continuing this iterative process and the technical work, really beginning, as we started to do this evening, talk about the narratives which we hope will be impactful to helping people to really understand and support this work. So in doing so, I invite you, I know that Andrea has amassed an excellent collection of resources on the town's own 3A website, but MAPC does also have a set of tools which are also geared toward this type of outreach and engagement, and has sort of FAQs and supporting documents, even some graphics and visuals that might be helpful. So if you're interested in thinking about how this starts to turn toward more of a narrative form, invite you to that resource as well. And then did want to just point to this slide, which does start to lay the foundation for some of those narratives, and we don't need to belabor them, but just you can take a look and add your own thoughts as well as we start to build out these narratives, which I think will be more important than in a lot of ways than the details. The details are important, and I think we can trust that we've all done a lot of hard work on those details, but we need to pop back up to the high level and let people know what this is all about at that sort of elevator pitch approach. Are there any questions about it? Anything else before we shift? I don't know, Andrea, do we have meeting minutes to adopt?
Sorry, guys, I am super behind on the meeting minutes. So will have drafts of all of those posted on the website because it's 3 meetings. And it's hard with the Zoom ones because they take a transcript and it's like 50 pages and I have to cut it down. But I will have drafts of all 3 of those meetings posted by the end of the week. And at your next meeting, you can just revise them and our admin, Idana, will post all of those as necessary.
Thank you.
Okay, Mariana, did I see your hand for a moment? Did you have a comment?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay, sorry. All right. And then next steps we have talked through very well, but there's a lot of moving parts still moving, and you can see many of those here. So we'll continue with the refinement of the zoning as discussed. The economic feasibility analysis is underway. Development design guidelines has more of a process around it now, so we're thankful for that, and we'll give you those examples post haste. And then the working with the planning board, the select board, et cetera, in that process, which will be initiated this week as well. And then the planning board public hearing is scheduled for August 22nd. Of course, ultimately we're moving toward town meeting, which is October 22nd. And this will all continue to get, I think in the way I would reassure you all on this, and having done processes like this before, is I think we have a very solid foundation where we're sitting right now, and all of the tweaking and changing and everything that we're doing is to make that foundation even better. So we're strengthening the pieces as we're moving forward, but we're starting from a point of a very strong place. I've gotten to processes with placeholders on town warrant meeting articles and things like that, where they have been not anywhere near close to what we have in hand at this point. So that is the good news. We've already talked through the timeline, and I don't know that we've probably exhausted anyone who wanted to make public comment, but if anyone is there, we want to offer that opportunity. Okay, not seeing any movement on public comment. I will refer everyone to the 3A website, which all of these resources, meeting recordings, and presentations are uploaded to, and we'll continue to have that as a resource. So thank you all, and I will stop sharing my screen, and we can see if there's any final thoughts or comments that anyone didn't get a chance to say something that they would have liked.
Thank you, Andrea. We're going to miss you.
Thank you. Yep. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you all. It's been a real pleasure and
Good luck.
one of the highlights of my time here. I appreciate it.
Will be sorely missed.
I'll miss you all.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thanks, Andrea.
And thanks, Josh and John. Okay, so we, as I said, I'll follow up. I've emailed ICAM and scheduled the next 2 meetings in room A. So I'll send a follow-up either tomorrow or Wednesday to the group with confirming all of this, get the agendas posted, and the meeting minutes will be posted by, draft meeting minutes will be posted by the end of the week for the, this meeting and then the 3 prior. All right. Hope everyone has a good night.
You
Good
too.
night, everyone.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Good night.
everybody. Have a good one.
Good night, everybody.